If you make a lot of quilts, odds are you're going to wind up with some that you regret. I'm Michelle, this is my romantic tangle, and I've got some things for you to do when you finish a quilt top and decide that that was a big mistake and you absolutely hate it. I have had underwhelming quilt tops over the years. I've had quilts that I realize I made poor choices with. Probably the most infuriating was this one here behind me. I was shop hopping with a friend and saw a quilt from the complete opposite size of this huge quilt shop, and it just screamed to me, Michelle, you must make this quilt. And I went home and I had a layer cake I had ordered on clearance sale from Connecting Threads, and that first quilt was 30s repro and my layer cake was 30s repro, and so I made myself a quilt. And when I finished the quilt top, I immediately realized where I had gone wrong. I don't like quilts with big blocks of fabric. And I made a quilt that is nothing but big blocks of fabric. Over the years, I have gotten better at slowing down just a little bit and asking myself, is this something that you want to make? Is this something you want to have in your house after you make it? This was before I learned that. So at the point where I decided I regretted the quilt top, the very first thing I should have done, well, probably I should have folded up the quilt top and let it sit while I made up my mind. What I definitely should not have done is run down to Joann's and spent money on a backing for a quilt I didn't like. This is Kona cotton or something. I could have backed this with a vintage sheet that I already had in my stash and cut down on the amount of money I had invested in this quilt. I had lots of options that would have coordinated with these front fabrics and been just fine, but no, I bought more fabric. I plunged more money into this project. I do my own quilting, so at least I did not invest in the skills of a long armor, because this could have cost a whole lot more than it did. And when I finished the quilt, and I didn't like it, there's nothing wrong with it. The piecing is, I mean, it's not going to win a ribbon at the state fair, but the piecing is fine. The binding is fine. There is nothing wrong with it, or was nothing wrong with it before it got used and abused by my family. The next thing I should have done with my finished quilt is I should have folded it up, I should have put it in a safe place, and I should have let it sit. Now, it's interesting. I do that with my favorite quilts. I do that with the quilts I love. But I really should have done it with this quilt that I wasn't sure about, because as soon as I was done with it, a kid ran through and went, hey, Mom, can I have that for my bed? And it was gone, which was fine at that point because I never, ever wanted to see it again. And a very short period of time after that, I needed a quilt to give to someone. If I had folded this quilt up and kept it like new, this would have been a good quilt to give for that event, because there's nothing wrong with it. It just antagonizes me because I look at it and see all the other things I could have, should have, would have done with that fabric. It's a good quilt. If I had set it aside and kept it safe and not let it immediately become a used quilt, there would have been lots of things I could have done with it, except now I've got a used quilt that I don't like. And to be honest with you, the first time I filmed this video, I had not dug up the quilt. I was just sitting here talking about the mistakes I had made. And now that I found the quilt in the closet, a lot of time has passed. My emotions have cooled down. I don't hate it nearly as much as I hated it when I first finished it. But I still think it would have been a good decision to use it to give away, because at that point I needed a quilt. I didn't have time to make a quilt from scratch, and this would have been the perfect quilt. I love that I learned how to do a jagged binding. I think that's the only new skill I learned from this quilt, because setting big 10-inch blocks on point is not terribly exciting. I can honestly, now that I'm sitting here with this, see making this quilt again with Halloween fabric or with the vast amount of Christmas fabric my mom and I have managed to accumulate, even though we never sew with the stuff. There are a lot of things I could do with this pattern that aren't this quilt that I would like better than this quilt. But honestly, I think I'm going to launder it, and I might drape it on the back of my couch for a while because it's not a bad quilt. I just didn't like it at the time. It is by no means the only quilt that I regret making. There have been others, of course there have, and I think everybody's been doing any kind of crafting for a long time has projects that just didn't live up to their expectations, or where they leaped before they looked and should have done something else. This is one of my top something else quilts. There was also a applique quilt that I wasn't up to the task of doing it, and it came out ugly, and late one night a kid puked on it, and it just kind of quietly went into the garbage can because at that point I was so done with that quilt. As the quilter, I am allowed to do that. In hindsight, maybe I could have washed it and donated it to the animal shelter, but at that moment I wasn't dealing with it. So if you don't like the quilt top you just finished, it is okay. Fold it up, put it in a safe place, and think about it for a while. Maybe you don't want to finish and quilt it at all. I know several charity groups that accept unfinished quilt tops and will quilt them and donate them and send them to wonderful causes. Maybe you want to finish it and donate it yourself. You're not trapped with that quilt for the rest of your natural life. Not every single quilt we make has to be an heirloom that we keep forever and ever and ever. Give yourself some breathing room. Think about what you might or might not want to do with it. And make more quilts, because there are always going to be better quilts in our future. Have you made a mistake by choosing the wrong pattern or wrong fabric, or realizing you were in over your head? I'd love to hear about it in the comment section. Thank you for watching. I am Michelle. This is my romantic tangle. And if you want to watch another video about the quilt I regret making because I used up all my red fabric, I'll put a link to that up in the corner. I'll be back with you with more videos soon.